What's up, guys? Ben here, bringing you another video today, the final installment in our season preview series in regards to all 12 CDL teams. We're going to talk OpTic Texas and Seattle. Theme of this video is the last dance. So let's dive in, talk about these teams' journey to this point, where they may succeed, where they may fail, what are their strong points, what are their weak points, and my predictions for how they will play this season. Let's start with OpTic Texas and dive in. So last season was an interesting one for OpTic Texas. Really strong start to the season, culminating in a massive cornerstone win for the franchise at Major 1 in really their own venue. But from there, they dealt with a number of issues, namely Illy's hand issues plagued them throughout the year. He participated in a couple of events, tried to give it a go at Pro-Am, wasn't able to really play the rest of that tournament, didn't play in Major 3, came back for Major 4 and Champs. But at that point, the team had fallen behind. We'll talk about their stats in a second. And so going into this season, definitely a lot to prove. I think also keep in mind the undercurrent with this team, as you all probably know by now, that Scump has announced that this is his last season in the CDL. So very much in the theme of the beginning of the video, the last dance with Michael Jordan. I think this very much applies to this team. It's going to look completely different next season. This franchise will look completely different next season without their cornerstone player in Scump, who's a go undisputed. And we were talking about FaZe in a prior video, but I think OpTic's stats are almost even better sometimes when you take a look at them. And it's kind of, again, wild. This team really kind of peaked in the beginning of the year and never really got past that point. I mean, even with, say, how much they struggled down the stretch in Tuscan Control. I mean, their numbers are insane just looking at this off the top. They were one of the elite, consistently elite teams throughout the year, just weren't able to translate it outside of some top fours once they got into sort of the meat of the season. And again, I think a lot of that comes down to Inder not being on the team and them feeling a little bit more uncomfortable with Byron. I think in a lot of those big losses too, a couple of mental mistakes and pacing issues really hurt them down the stretch. And you can see, even if you dive in a little bit further here, this stage 1 numbers are absurd. They were 9-1 in control, 10-5 in hardpoint. It's just going to be hard to lose an event like that, even if you're in 6 S&D. Then you start to see some of them coming back to earth. Hardpoint S&D numbers not bad in stage 2. They continue to be amazing at control. Tuscan number is absurd. But I think as we start to look at stage 4, when Illy came back, they really started to struggle in hardpoint, specifically Bocage hardpoint. So how Vito's went down against this team, they ended up having to play it quite a bit. And I don't think they really figured out their issues between that and Champs. And so you see that these numbers, control 2 and 7 is also one I want to highlight, really fell off in that game mode. And unfortunately, did not play good enough, although they did get a decent placing at Champs. First is really kind of what they were looking for. And they ran into Seattle and they couldn't really get it done on the weekend. And so a really disappointing finish for them to end the season. Let's talk a little bit about their lineup for the season. And honestly, they almost didn't run it back with their main roster. Again, kind of taking the thread from the end of last season, I think there were a lot of internal issues and the team has kind of spoke on this over the off season. And so at one point, and they actually even announced it, they were going to drop Dashi and Illy. And then within a span of 24 hours, they walked that back. They were going to pick up Attach and they were going to pick up Hydra. I don't know if that team would have been better than their current squad, but it seems like they talked it out and figured out that they wanted to run it back. So it was a very interesting week or two in the land of OpTic, kind of like in August when they were trying to figure this out. The only real major change that they have made this season is Troy Sender is no longer with the team as a coach. He has gone off to the New York Subliners, and they have brought in JP from New York to replace his spot, less as a coach, I think more as sort of leading sort of the analytical thinking and analyst side of their coaching staff, which I think is a pretty good add. I'm a big JP fan, and I think it gives OpTic a numbers, catches them up to, I think, the numbers conversation that they've been really lagging behind. I know Rambo's more of a old school field coach, but at some level, I think they needed someone to come in and really do a little bit more of a traditional scouting kind of analytics build up for them so they can be a little bit more prepared. So I like the moves from OpTic. And I think when we talk about the weaknesses and the strengths of this team, I think a lot of it's going to reflect on what we saw last season. So, I think the strength of this team is really your skill positions, kind of main AR and SMG. Bruce, aka Dashi, incredibly skilled player. One of, I think, probably has the best setting to make impact plays on the map. Because Seth is, by the way, Seth had a really good season last year. I'm not taking away from Seth's skill. Seth is a really good frontline SMG, more of a pre-aim SMG, which is a little bit of a lost art these days in COD. I think where Shotzi gives this team sort of its cutting factor, its real edge, and when they play well, I think why they are really successful is Ant's ability to find gaps in how teams set up and get behind players, get doubles, really kind of probe and create chaos on the map. And this really opens up, areas for Dashi and Scump to really shine in their ability to slay and win their ones. And when this team is on, Ender is also very good at the gap filling. But I think this gets to the weakness of the team. One is Inder's slaying ability. Last season, his stats weren't too bad. You know, he had a .98 overall, which is pretty solid. But if you look at his career numbers, if I were to pull that up, and you look at, you know, how did he do in Modern Warfare and Cold War, you'll see that he's somewhere between a 1 and a .95 player, which is not too bad. But it's always going to put him into question with the fan base of whether or not he has enough slaying to, you know, compete with their ambitions. And I think he can be an integral part. But there are times where his slaying is inconsistent. So want to highlight that. I think other weaknesses of this team, and unfortunately I need to bring this up, was sort of how they struggled last season. And I think they talked about it a little bit in the process video that came out over the offseason. They felt like they took their foot off the gas pedal quite a bit when the early injury came in. And I think this is not a one-year problem. This camp has had this issue for a number of years, going, I think, back almost towards Black Ops 4. Like post-Dynasty, I don't think they've gotten that full year of real hard work ethic, you know, grinding start to finish. I think they've always had these weak spots. And the problem with them is when they get to the weak spot, they get behind and they can't catch up to other teams. Look, any professional player who's won champs will tell you, like, it's not like their team played 100% amazing COD the whole season. If they're telling you that, and I'm thinking like someone like Aches might say that, they're lying. They're not telling the truth. Every team goes through peaks and valleys, and it's how you get out of the valleys is what defines you as a team. I think where this team has struggled is their real inability to get out of that valley. And so I think this season they've been a lot more about business. They haven't streamed scrims a lot this year. Supposedly they're also trying to play from the old Envy headquarters to maybe improve their net situation and be more isolated so they can focus more on their team stuff. I think there's more of a real commitment this year to that and really carrying that throughout the season because, again, I'll keep mentioning this is Scump's last season. So you want to make sure you can let him win that chip at the end of the season and walk off into the sunset. I think that would be very disappointing for them if he's unable to get that moment in front of everyone, this sort of storybook moment to finish his career. All right, so the coaches have OpTic Texas in their initial ranking as 7th, and this might be a little bit of a surprise to people. A couple of things. One is, and I've said this now in a couple of videos, look how close the points are between all of these teams, like from 3rd to all the way down to where OpTic is at 7th. So just keep that in mind. It's a couple of votes is deciding the difference here. They're placing between like 3rd and 7th. What I've heard about OpTic Texas are amongst the pack of all of these sort of top 8 mid-pack teams, and I'm of the mind that that's okay because if you're a team like OpTic, they're not really going to ever be in danger of not qualifying for champs. They're going to have plenty of points, and they're going to get a quality seed going in the last event of the season. So look, if you're going to pull up, you're still working on issues, you go 2-2 over this 4-game stretch you're going to play in the next 2 weeks, like that's fine. Everybody's going through the groups. Obviously, you want first seeding in your group, but if you don't get it, it's not the end of the world. You drop a few points, it's not the end of the world. The most important thing is setting up your season for success by like figuring out what you want to use these next 4 matches to identify problems with your team and work on those things. So I wouldn't panic if you're OpTic fans seeing this ranking, because for me, I think this team's going to be top 3, top 4, top 2 all season, depending on, again, what kind of form. Like, they are going to be a competitor. They're going to be making it to weekends. Now, will they get to the final matches of those weekends, get to those grand finals and get those ships? I think that is way more of a question this year. And I don't think it's really so much of a reflection of the OpTic team itself. I think the problem is that it is definitely got a little bit more competitive at the top, especially if teams like Minnesota and Toronto are as good as advertised this season. It's not going to be like another cakewalk where OpTic and FaZe are kind of your 1 and 2, or like last season where Thieves came alive at the end of the season. I think there's definitely going to be kind of a continuing, you know, sort of theme throughout the season of teams, I think, really like kind of peaking and making things very competitive. So I expect OpTic to be there or thereabouts throughout the year. Now, the one thing I will say for this OpTic Texas team, a dynamic that I'm going to look to see what they do is if they have a slow start to the season, let's say they pull up to Major 1 and they get like, I don't know, top 6. Do you really think about making an early roster change? Maybe moving on from Inder and Bruce if better options arise. Look, maybe I'm kind of stirring the pot there, but I don't think this team's going to have a long leash this season. Again, it is Scump's last season. They don't want it to be a complete waste. They don't want him to sort of have this whimper, kind of leave from the CDL. So they may be very aggressive on roster changes if things are not clicking, instead of like last year where they tried to really make it work the whole season and then made a roster change and didn't make a roster change. So personally, I think that scenario of them having a weak start is probably not the most likely scenario. I see them, you know, probably being top 3, top 4 at that first event. Continuing this theme here, let's talk about the Seattle Surge, our last team that we've got to preview this year. Really, I would say for Seattle, all things considered, probably an amazing season last season. They were incredibly up and down, and we'll get to that in a second, but they did win Major 3 in surprising fashion at Toronto, and they played amazing at Champs, falling just short to Atlanta FaZe in the grand finals. And candidly, I think just FaZe had the better kind of search game than they did when it came push to shove in that final match. And so not a bad placing for Seattle. You were top 3 last season. Now, the theme of this video is the last dance. And I'll be honest, you know, I think the kind of undercurrent with this team that didn't make really any changes this season. I think really for me, it's there is a likely chance, again, we talk about the OpTic situation in Scump, that may knock down the potential changes to this team in next year's offseason. So this might be the last kind of go around for this team in this form, and their last probably opportunity with this squad to maybe get a chance for it. So let's dive in. Let's talk a little bit more about their stats from last season, though, as we color their moves and kind of decisions that they made in the offseason. So we take a look at their stats from last season, and they're very good. I think the one game mode, again, that I just highlighted that they struggled on, surprisingly, I think is S&D. And I think, again, that's probably why they fell short, I think, at champs. But the hardpoint numbers were good. I think the theme with this team last season, though, was they were kind of streaky event to event. Some events they were very good. Some events they were really bad. And when you look at the sort of individual stats by game mode, it really highlights that. Like, first event, they were just not particularly good at hardpoint. We get to stage 2 and a little bit better, but now sort of the control falling off, really struggling in Gavitu. 0-4 in Gavitu in stage 2. In the event that they won, they really clicked it on in hardpoint, going 5-1 on Bocage. No one wanted to square up with Pred on that map. And you see the 9-1 on control, that's pretty good. 8-6 on S&D. But the hard fall off at Major 4, where they did not play particularly well at that event, not really good stats across the board on those maps and modes. And then we take a look at champs, and you see they were 9-1 in hardpoint at this event, really untouchable. But the S&D really let them down at that tournament. Same with control, and I think they were really just kind of grinding out series at that point to get to that top 3. So they were sort of up and down, and I think the theme of consistency is something that they need to work on as we talk about their moves. And they didn't really make any moves. I think the only real change in their kind of camp was Novus Vita leaving as GM of Seattle Surge to head over to LA Thieves when Mud Dog switched over to content. And they brought in, sort of in his stead, someone else to really kind of do the analytical stuff. With their coaching staff, they brought over Carson, who I had to help bring over on the CDL broadcast side the season before. So he made the jump into the team world. Kind of almost a like-for-like switch. I think Carson will give a lot of same things that Brandon was doing. So they're still going to be getting prepped well. Let's talk about where this team is good. Let's talk about where they struggle. So I think their strength is the dynamic playmaking of Pred and Sib. Again, we talked about this with Dash. I think Dante's pre-aim centering ability, like raw AR skill ability, is amazing. I think with Pred, I don't really know what else there is to say about Pred. This man came in and was like insta rookie of the year last year. It wasn't even a question. You look at these numbers, they are unbelievable. He had a 1.1 last season. Overall, 1.13 in hardpoint, 1.02 in S&D. Like, those are insane. I mean, dude, his ability to make plays, hit routes, we'll see if he can carry it over this season. I think he can probably do it. But he's now vaulted himself very much in the top, like, 5 sub conversation. And when we talk about the OpTic situation, when people talk about Scump replacements, they've been identifying this guy as the player that they want. I think where this team has weaknesses, unfortunately, is the other 2 players on the team have, I think, certain shortcomings in their ability. I really like Mac, and, you know, when he joined the New York Subliners team in Modern Warfare, I think that was a huge boost to their team when they inevitably won that home series win. But I think that at times in the last 2.5 years, like, Mac is super inconsistent. There are stretches where he really struggles and slumps, and there are stretches where this guy is dominant, taking over games. And so I think he may actually legit be the sort of X factor of this team, most inconsistent player. And if they want to be a little bit better across the board this season, more consistently better, instead of being super up and down, they're going to need him to really find a vein of form or consistent form throughout the year. And look, I really like Lamar. I think this team would not work without him because he brings a real veteran presence. He brings a camaraderie. Like, I don't think this camp would stick together. I think they would fall apart without Lamar. But I'm not going to sit here and say that Lamar is the most amazing skilled AR of all time. His numbers don't really back that up. I think Lamar's skills are in other areas. But if I had to identify a shortcoming, look, he's not going to be, and he might be, one of the bottom sling ARs in the league. He's not going to be a dynamic movement guy. He's going to very much play headies in his spots, and he's been known for that for a very long time. So they really lack that dimension that, say, like a FaZe do with Celium or OpTic does where Dashi, where those players can play a little bit more active with the AR if they want to. Lamar's going to be a little bit more limited in his ability, and it kind of like means that they need to kind of account for that tactically. I think the final weakness for this team, and I think less of a, you know, I want to frame this as less of a weakness and more of a soft skill that they need to work on, is talking to people and sort of around the camp. I think a big focus this season, trying to funnel their emotions better throughout the year. I think they really kind of play with that on their sleeve. And at times, again, it sort of affects the consistency of this team. They're really passionate about trying to win, but I think they're trying to find better ways to funnel that. That gives them a better baseline because, again, a lot of teams have gotten better, Minnesota, Toronto, et cetera, et cetera. And so, you know, they want to try and be better throughout the year. And I think figuring that pathway out and really becoming an always top 4 team instead of a sometimes top 4 team, it would be a really good goal for them. But I identify that as slight weakness because it contributes a lot to their inconsistency last year. If they were going down 0-2 in series, like, you know, it was really tricky for them. Good series, they've had bad series. It's early scrim, so that's going to happen. I do think that if there is a candidate of some of these top 8 teams to maybe be a little bit slower, maybe a surprise team that might not make it out of groups in Major 1, it might be this squad, but I wouldn't really panic if you're a Seattle fan. It might take them a sec to get in gear, but I just think with Dante and Pred in this game, like they are destined to do great things. I just don't know if it's going to translate into an event win this season, but I do think they're good for at least a grand final or 2, just purely because those guys can hard carry. And like Pred is basically on his path to being in that like Shotzzy simp conversation here very quickly. But I also wonder, the undercurrent is at some level, if they struggle early this season, are they going to maybe try and finally pull the trigger on a change on accuracy? I don't think that would be a wise decision. I think the minute that you remove Lamar from this team, I think a lot of other things don't fall into place. And for Sam Phoenix, who I think is a pretty quality coach, I think he will have a really tough task on his hand to sort of manage those personalities without Lamar to really back him up. Sort of Lamar's lack of slaying ability obviously limits their ceiling sometimes. They're still good enough to win events. They did last season. So I think they need to kind of try and keep that thread going. Again, it's a long season. They're going to be good at champs. And then after that, I mean, it's sort of a question mark with this team, especially if, you know, Pred's going off to a bigger roster, yada, yada, yada. But I see Seattle as an easy top 8 team. Should qualify for champs unless they really, really hit a vein of form on the negative side in the beginning of the season. And they really need to make up the points gap. But we've seen New York do that last season. So I think Seattle can definitely make it in champs. I just don't know. Like you take a look at Minnesota and Toronto, like who may have better starts than Seattle. Like they may not get a group. So we'll see what happens. But they should be pretty competitive. And so that's the video, guys. I think the last dance sort of applies to both teams, but in different ways. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Coming up later this week, my next video, we will have predictions for our matches coming up this weekend. I'm going to do a little bit of a Q&A video, so be on the lookout on Twitter for a post to reply to with your questions, and I'll answer those on a video that will come out Friday. And then one thing I'm thinking about doing, and I'm going to try out this weekend, is kind of doing these shorts videos, sort of 1-minute reacts to the matches. I don't really have time to do a big kind of after each day sort of videos. It's just not gonna, I think it's just not gonna get views. It's gonna be hard to turn around quickly. I think maybe doing something on the shorts front on the weekends might be a little better. So I'm gonna experiment with that. We'll see how that goes. And then on Monday, we'll do sort of the main takeaways from that first week of matches. So I am super excited on that front. As always, guys, like if you enjoyed the content, subscribe for more, and we'll see y'all on the next one.